Today, we're diving into a massive mystery, one that really defines why our world looks the way it does.
I mean, this is the big question in economics, right? It's the one leaders and thinkers have wrestled with for literally centuries. What is the secret sauce? What allows some nations to just take off, while others seem to get left behind?
Well, the answer is kind of like a detective story. It involves a tale about saving, a really surprising paradox that turns everything on its head, and a hidden engine that, it turns out, powers our entire modern world. We're going to piece it all together, and I promise, by the end of this, you'll see the global economy in a whole new way.
Okay, so every good mystery starts with the most obvious suspect. And in the Great Growth Mystery, that suspect is saving money. It just seems intuitive, doesn't it? If a country wants to get rich, it should just save and invest more.
And yeah, on the surface, this idea is solid. A country saves a bunch of its income, and then it can invest in building more stuff, more factories, more machines, better roads. All that stuff is what economists call capital. And more capital should mean everyone's more productive, which should make the country wealthier. Simple.
Early economists even formalized this with something called the Herod-Dahmer model. The idea was super straightforward. Your growth rate is basically set by how much you save and how good you are at turning those savings into useful capital. Seems like case closed, right? Well, not so fast.
And this is where the plot really thickens. That simple, elegant story of save more, grow faster, it started to fall apart when people really dug into the data.
The person who really threw a wrench in the works was an economist named Robert Solow, who later won a Nobel Prize for this. He showed that, yeah, saving is super important, but it's not the whole story. Turns out, there's a built-in speed limit.
And that speed limit has a name: diminishing returns. It's a really simple concept when you think about it. Imagine you've got one person digging a hole. You give them a shovel, huge productivity boost. But then you give them a second shovel? What are they going to do with it? It doesn't help. Or think of a coffee shop. The first espresso machine is a game changer. The second one helps with the morning rush. The 10th espresso machine is probably just collecting dust. At some point, adding more stuff just doesn't give you the same bang for your buck.
So let's make this concrete. Imagine two countries. We've got Australia, the super saver, putting aside 30% of its income. And then we have Gastandia, which only saves 10%. Now make no mistake, Australia is absolutely going to end up a richer country. But here's the mind-bending twist that Solow pointed out. Eventually, because of diminishing returns, both countries will end up growing at the exact same slow pace. The richer country stops pulling away.
So, what does this all mean? It means our first suspect, just piling up capital, it has an alibi. It gets you to a higher level of wealth for sure, but it cannot explain why economies keep growing and growing, year after year. It can't explain sustained growth. And that left a massive hole in the theory, and a whole new mystery to solve.
So if saving wasn't the silver bullet, what is? It was time to look for the real engine of growth, the thing that's truly responsible for the world we live in today.
I mean, this is the real puzzle, right? If just adding more machines and factories eventually fizzles out, what keeps the whole thing going? What's the secret to growth that lasts not just for a few years, but for generations?
And interestingly, Solow himself found the next big clue. When he crunched the numbers on actual economic growth, he found he could explain some of it with more workers, and some with more capital, but there was this huge leftover piece of growth that was completely unexplained. He called it the Solow residual, but what it really represented was technology, progress, better ideas. It wasn't just about having more stuff, it was about having smarter stuff.
Now, for a while, that was a pretty good answer. The only problem was that in Solow's model, technology kind of just appeared, like magic. But that's not really how it works, is it? Later economists like Paul Romer came along and said, hang on, technology doesn't just happen. We make it happen. We invest in R&D, we educate people, we create incentives to innovate. It's an intentional process.
And way before all these guys, another brilliant economist, Joseph Schumpeter, had already come up with the perfect, almost poetic name for this whole chaotic process. He called it creative destruction. Destruição criadora.
And it's such a perfect description. Think about it. A new innovation pops up, let's say streaming services. What does it do? Well, it creates this amazing new way to watch movies, but it also destroys the old way. Remember video rental stores? Gone. But in the rubble of that old industry, you get new jobs, new companies, new possibilities we couldn't even imagine before. That constant churning, that creation and destruction, that is the real engine of long-term growth.
But we can't just gloss over that second word, can we? Destruction. That's not just an abstract economic concept. It has a real human impact. This powerful engine of growth isn't a smooth ride, especially for people's jobs.
And that's really the heart of the challenge. This whole process makes society as a whole much, much richer over time. But for the person whose factory just closed or whose skills are suddenly out of date, it's brutal. And that brings us to the final piece of our puzzle, unemployment.
So to really understand this impact, we've got to be clear on what we're even talking about. How do we measure who actually counts as unemployed?
Because to really get a handle on this, we have to pull apart that big, scary number you always hear on the news, the unemployment rate. It's actually a lot more complicated than it looks, because not all unemployment is created equal.
Okay, so economists usually break it down into three main types. First, you've got frictional unemployment. This is the normal, everyday stuff. People finishing school and looking for a job, or just moving between jobs. It's actually a sign of a healthy, dynamic economy. Then there's structural unemployment. This is the direct result of that creative destruction we were just talking about. It's when there's a serious mismatch between the skills people have and the jobs that are actually available. Think about a coal miner in an economy that's rapidly shifting to green energy. That is a tough, structural problem. And finally, you have cyclical unemployment. This is the one that gets all the headlines. It's when the whole economy hits a rough patch, a recession, and companies start laying people off across the board.
But even knowing these three types, there's one last, really important twist you have to understand, and it's a weird one. Sometimes, right in the middle of a really bad recession, the official unemployment number can actually go down.
How is that even possible? Well, it's because of how we define unemployed. To be officially counted, you can't just be out of a job. You have to be actively looking for one. Now, imagine you've been searching for work for over a year with no luck. A lot of people in that situation, they just give up. They get discouraged and stop looking. The moment they stop looking, poof, they vanish from the official unemployment statistics. So you can have this bizarre situation where the real jobs crisis is getting worse, but the official rate actually improves.
So where does all this leave us? We've solved our mystery. The secret to long-term growth is innovation, that powerful engine of creative destruction. But that engine has two faces, right? The creation is what makes us all wealthier over the long run, but the destruction creates real pain and dislocation for people today. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all, one every society is grappling with. How do we keep that incredible engine of creation roaring ahead while also managing the inevitable destruction it leaves in its wake? That balancing act, that's the real challenge.